Traditional IT communication is broken. Projects fail, money is wasted, and businesses struggle to keep up. But what if you can change all of that? Today, I am talking to someone who has mastered bridging businesses and IT, with 3 successful exits to prove that. Hey friends, welcome back to Tech for Founder podcast, where we help non-tech founders turn ideas into thriving businesses. I'm Panida, and each week I bring on top tech founders to share strategies and stories to help you level up your startup. No coding required. If you're ready to grow, hit subscribe and join us. Today, we're joined by Dave Burrill, a former CPA turned tech entrepreneur who scaled startups from zero to IPO, grew businesses to hundreds of millions, and fixed communication between businesses and IT. In this episode, he'll review how to break free from traditional IT communication pitfalls and make tech work for your business. Let's jump right in and find out why your IT communication strategy might be holding you back and how to fix it. Can you share your journey from being a certified public accountant to becoming a tech entrepreneur with 3 successful exits?
Sure. And by the way, thanks for having me. It's nice to be on.
Nothing.
Yeah, I never wanted to be an accountant. I got certified as a CPA because I wanted to know how to talk to them. So I started off life thinking I wanted to be an academician. I was working on a PhD in organization and systems design. And I got to the point where I'd done all the coursework, but then I realized I had another 5 years of abject poverty to write a dissertation. And I had another realization, abject poverty sucked. So I didn't want to spend 5 more years destitute writing a dissertation. So the guy that was the chairman of my committee became the first chief learning officer in the world for Jack Welch at GE. And he had made a suggestion. He said, look, if you ultimately want to be, at that time, it was a VP of IT. He said, go to one of the big 8, go to someplace like Price Waterhouse or Arthur Andersen. He said, get certified as a CPA because that way you'll get to understand all of the systems of a business, how everything comes together. So being a CPA or becoming a CPA at Price Waterhouse was just a way to get that internship, to just understand the background of how a business all comes together. So that was like one more box that you check before you go back and you try and do what you really want to do. So from there, and plus it was also easy because I was billing 100 hours a week, and that was just enough to destroy any relationship, the life and your health and all the rest. So I left there and joined a med tech startup that was one of the earliest adopters of telemetric medicine, focused on high-risk obstetrics. So I joined them when they were on a run rate of about $7 million a year. So they were just at first revenue. And I left them 4 years and 4 months, 5 months later, when they were 275 million, and I had taken them public. So I worked directly for the CEO/chairman and the CFO. Those were the 2 guys that signed my evaluations. And I basically was their henchman. And that's not a great description, but I got to do all of the new business development, put in place all the new systems. I wrote the MD&A for the public offering and helped raise money for the company. I don't remember how much, about $40 million we raised at that time, which was then a decent amount of money. It's pittance now, but that kind of really gave me the bug. I realized that you could it was in the creation of a business where wealth is generated. At about 31, 32 years old, I came out of that with a decent little hit financially, and I wanted to do it myself. So I started a consulting group that went on for about 3.5 years, and that turned into a software company that we raised some angel funding for, a couple $1 million. And we wound up selling that to another publicly traded company in 2003. So another little hit, financial hit, or bump, however you want to describe it. Hit probably isn't the right word. It's still early for me. The caffeine hasn't, fully coursed through my body yet. And then after I got free from the lockup period with the people that acquired us, did another stint with a company that we wound up growing from. I joined them at first revenue when we sold it to Western Digital. a couple years later. Those are the three runs: one IPO exit, two exits, two acquisition.
That's fascinating. So you would say that you becoming a certified public accountant was like your school of learning, right? So it's like going to school for exactly what you needed to know how to build a business.
That was it exactly.
So
That
what
was
would
it
you
exactly.
say? Yeah, definitely. So what would you say is like the mindset that like helped you raise money and help grow so many businesses? Was there like something like specific?
For me, I'm just hopelessly inquisitive. My curiosity never stops. I'm the sort of guy that would probably dissect his hand if I could figure out a way to put it back together again, which is not necessarily always good. But I've always been an idea guy, and I see things that other people don't. And when I think that there's a need in the market, I've just tried to go out. I've been either crazy enough or self-confident enough to go out and try and do it. And that's really what I'm doing now, just in a much more relaxed fashion. I'm not trying to raise money from anybody at this point. I'm just doing it on my own.
It's very interesting. So you would have to approach things from a different angle to everyone else, right? And just
I think it's seeing things from a different angle of everyone else. And I'll give you a case in point. Bridging Business and IT, which is where I'm managing director right now. It's a group of a bunch of people that are of my stage in their career. They've been around, they've had some successes, they've been in very senior leadership positions. And now it's really focused more on mentoring and coaching other people and trying to share what we learned. But in terms of seeing things that other people don't, I've made the comment for a long time. There's only two types of software. You either automate a process or you report on the performance of one. Fundamentally, that's it. They fall into those two camps. People don't think about that. People don't think about the fact that there's only four types of worker in any organization. There's the workers that do the work. There's the managers that manage the work. There's the analysts that take the data that comes out of the workers and the managers and try and figure out what it means. And the executives that refine the process, the business process going forward. So I can't tell you how many times I've talked to, and it's seemingly always either a guy out of IBM or out of MIT that go, "Oh my God, you're right. I never thought of it like that." It's this stuff stares you in the face, but a lot of people don't see it. One last illustration is I was in a meeting a couple months ago now, and I was listening to this discussion among a bunch of Agile enthusiasts, how there's absolutely no way to judge whether or not a project has been successful. And I listened to this for a while. I said, wow, you guys are living in a different universe than I am. I said, because first of all, whether you're doing waterfall or a sprint, there's always scope, schedule, and budget. You always know, did you deliver what you said you were going to deliver? Did you do it and for the amount of money that you said you were going to do it? Did you do it on time? But aside from that, every business process shares the same 7 metrics. So this is about moving a ball from point A to point B, hopefully as fast as you can to generate profit, right? Ultimately, and this big summation, but that's the basic idea. So think about this. There's always inputs to the process, right? So metric number 1 is, what are the inputs? Metric number 2 is, how fast is the transit time? How long did it take you to go from A to B? At the end of that, you've got output volume. How much did you produce? And output quality. How good is this stuff that you did? Then there's always customer satisfaction. So how happy was the customer with that? And then you can look at how much did it cost you to do it and how much profit did you generate? Those are standard in any business process, but people don't step back and see that stuff. So those are some illustrations of this is the stuff I see that surprisingly a lot of people don't.
so you would say you're taking like a bigger picture view than other people, right? Because other people are just looking very closely at the problem or at something specific. But if you look back, like you'll see more interesting things. Would you say?
I don't know if it's a bigger picture view, but it's seen through the facade.
Uh,
People get lost. They can't see the forest through the trees. And I think that's the biggest issue. They're not able to, they're not able to appreciate where they are. Uh, And we do this. all the time in these projects. I'm really focused on technology and business, right? But one of the biggest problems we have is we call them IT projects. They're never IT projects. They're business projects that just happen to be enabled by technology, right?
Yeah.
And the second you call it an IT project, a couple of very bad things happen. The business people in the project immediately just wash their hands of it. They think, okay, it's not my issue. It's an IT project, right? It's not my responsibility. It's the IT department's. Wrong. The only people that know how that process works are the business people. And if they wash their hands of it, how are the IT folks going to know? So that's one issue. On the flip side, you make IT responsible for decisions they can't possibly make. So you set yourself up for failure right out of the gate just by virtue of the way that you describe the project.
Yeah, definitely. I think I completely agree with you. I think business and IT people have to work together, right? Because IT people, they're very good at developing things, and business people are good at making money from those things that are developed, right? And if
Right.
they don't work together, then these people would just be they'll just be programming and these people will be like, oh, let's sell things, but they haven't spoken, so they'll just be it's just not practical.
It always amazes me the stuff that people think that they've communicated that they haven't.
Yeah,
We make the assumption that everybody else knows what we know, and that's not a good assumption to make.
definitely. S- Yeah. So you've had an impressive career with over 30 years in tech. What was one of the most significant challenges faced early on, and how did you overcome it?
Other people more senior to you not understanding what you were saying or not seeing what you were seeing. That's probably the best way to describe it. When you're just starting out, it's very easy for you to be dismissed by the more senior executives because for a number of reasons, some of them good, some of them bad. They've got their own set of experiences. They've been around the block. They know things that you don't. But just because they've seen some things doesn't mean that they've seen everything. And I'll give you a case in point of something that's happened that, like I said, when you start out your career, you're working with generally lower level people, but as you rise up, you start working with more senior executives. Several years ago, I was introduced to the CEO of the mortgage division of one of the biggest banks in the world. They had a problem with a project. And what had happened was they'd spent 18 months and $2 million on this reporting project, and they had nothing to show for it. So a mutual friend had put us in touch, and we had lunch one day, and the guy was explaining the problem to me in terms of this is a microcosm of what I'm talking about. After he explained what he was going through, I said, let me just ask you a couple questions to understand, to get a better handle on what's happening. I said, did you guys ever figure out the business questions you were trying to answer? And he looked at me with this condescending expression. That's the stupidest question I've ever heard in my entire life. This is what you have to deal with when you're a little younger and things other people don't. He said, why would you ask me that? Like, how retarded, what's wrong with you? Why would you ask this? And I said, this is a reporting exercise, right? He said, yes. He said, the only reason to write a report is to answer a business question. If you don't have a question to answer, don't waste your time writing the report. Oh, I never thought of it like that. Okay. Did you guys figure out the business process you were trying to evaluate? No. What do you mean? I said, look, business is pretty basic. It's about moving a ball from point A to point B, right? To get something done. If you don't know what that journey looks like, how are you going to evaluate it? Oh, no, we didn't do that. I didn't think about that. Did you figure out the metrics you wanted to evaluate? No. And then I went back into something similar to these are the 7 metrics in any business process. And fundamentally, all metrics in any business process break into 3 camps. How much, how well, how fast. Every analytical data point, every analytical metric out there is is one of those 3 or a combination of those 3. How much, how fast, how well. It's really pretty simple, right? This guy got none of it. So this conversation went on for about an hour and a half. Now, this is not a dumb guy. This is a very accomplished senior executive. And at the end of it, I can confess to being just slightly vindictive. So having been dismissed, I'll put it that way, or dissed very early on as some type of a moron, I look back and I said, so let me get this straight. You guys fired a $2 million cruise missile. Nobody ever bothered to find the target. And now you're wondering why you didn't hit it? And when you put it that way, that's exactly what we did. So in terms of what's the biggest obstacle I faced, it was confronting situations like that when in the early part of your career, but you reach a point where you've had enough success or you have enough faith in yourself that you realize, no, it's not me, it's them. And you're willing to push back and argue your case and be able to do it fairly successfully. And it's a little bit of an art form to be able to do that. Yeah, but it certainly requires some self-confidence.
Definitely. I think it's very important for young people to have that self-confidence, but also not delude themselves if they do not have the skills yet, right? I think that's important as well.
You're not going to acquire those sorts of insights after 3 days on the job
Yeah,
or 3 years on the job. Yeah, there is value to pattern recognition. After I've seen something 200 or 300 times, even I begin to detect the pattern.
definitely. So at least a few years on the job and then start bring out all your opinions.
Yeah, and share them and test them. Test them against other people. If they respond like, oh my God, I never thought of it like that. Okay, then develop that more, push that a little bit forward. It takes the independent validation from other people to give you that type of sort of moral clarity or moral support. The intellectual willingness to put yourself out there, take a risk and say things like you need to say. I'll give you another story that kind of summarizes it. I was raising money for the second company in 1999. And it happened to be December 7th, 1999. It was the end of a roadshow. And we were ushered into this guy's office who was an oversized Gordon Gekko. So the Michael Douglas character in Wall Street. This guy was about 6'3", 300 pounds, the most just hideous display of wealth I've ever seen. He had a gold Rolex watch that just had chunks of gold welded onto it along with diamonds. It was just ridiculous. It was so over the top. And it was a 30-minute pitch where you're trying to raise money from these people. And we walked in the door and the guy greeted us, nice enough. It was a small office, maybe 10 by 14. Had a round table on it with a couple of monitors in the back. The day before Yahoo, this is at the height of the dot-com bubble, Yahoo had gone up by something like 12% the day before. So the guy said, before we get started, I just need to make one call. And he picks up the phone and he says, short 5 million shares of Yahoo at the open. Shorting 5 million shares of stock is a serious bet, right? That's quite an investment or quite a speculative move, I should say. So the investment bankers do the introduction. The CEO does his little deal. So after 3 or 4 minutes, it's flipped over to me to explain what the business is. And at this point in time, we had a software company that focused on analytics. And I said, the thing that makes us different from every other business intelligence application out there is that they all make the statement, make better decisions faster. I said, we will tell you what's okay, what's not okay, who or what is involved in each group and how much it costs, what the impact of each of those players are. So you know exactly where to target your scarce management resources, your time, to get the greatest bang for your buck. And this is the only time the guy paid any attention to us. So he shook when I said that. He had a whole body sort of convulsion. But other than that, he was looking at his monitors. And as the conversation went on, he's not looking at us, not making eye contact. He's watching the monitors. It turned out the reason he was watching the monitors because he was losing his butt on the trade. Yahoo went up by 22% that day. The guy lost $50 million in a 30-minute meeting. But at one point, after he picked up the phone and said, cover the short, it didn't work. I looked over and I said, oh, this is ridiculous. This guy's never going to give us a penny. He said, no, this is great. Keep going. Well, the second time he picked up the phone and he's screaming. Now the veins are bulging out of the side of his neck. He's sweating profusely. His forehead is furrowed. I think the guy's going to have a stroke right in front of us. It's this bad. If you lost $50 million inside of 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you'd feel the same way, right? So I said, look, you're obviously not having a good morning. We'll let you go. Not a problem. No, keep going. This is great. So I finished up the presentation. I'm thinking, this is the biggest waste of time I've ever seen in my entire life. This guy's never going to give us a nickel. And he looked at me and goes, my God, that was the greatest presentation I've ever seen. What's okay? What's not okay? What's involved and how much it costs? He said, I've seen 300 companies come through here. And he said, every one of them makes the same statement, make better decisions faster. You're the only guy who ever told me how you're going to do it. He goes, I'll give you $1 million. And he did, which was really amazing. To this day, I can't believe he did it. But another long illustration, sorry about that, but it gives you the idea that those are the sorts of things that you will need to be able to see that other people can't and articulate succinctly. That's all an executive cares about. What part of the business is okay? What's not okay? Who falls into each camp? If you've got 100 people that are suboptimal performers and one of them, and collectively they're $1 billion problem, but one of them represents $900 million of the problem, forget the other 99, go after the one that's causing the $900 million issue and fix him or her. And you will have done more than if you were to fix the other 99 combined. So the idea of organizational triage, going after your biggest problems first, is things we don't think about. And we don't frame it that way.
Definitely. I think, yeah, that's a very visual representation of how to approach problems. And I think it really shows that if you think differently and also you're able to see the problem more clear than other people, then you're more likely to make it in business and in technology.
I think you are, yeah. I think that makes a huge difference.
Definitely. So communication is the cornerstone of your current venture. Can you break down the 3 phases to master IT team communication that you developed? And how can non-technical founders apply these in their startups?
Okay, good 2-part question. The first part of it is you have to recognize the magnitude of the problem, right? So that would be step 1. We all know these things, but we don't think about it. All of the best research indicates that IT projects, tech-enabled business projects, fail of a rate of about 70% overall. Now, there's good news and bad news in that statement. Not all failures are created equal. Only about 20% are smoking craters, complete write-offs. So 1 in 5 are a complete disaster, a dumpster fire. 50% are just way over budget, way behind schedule, or way under. Again, that's the good news. Bad news is, if the project's over $1 million, and it's real easy these days for a project to go over $1 million, the failure rate jumps by 50%. So that means the dumpster fires are now a third, 1 in 3. Almost 2 out of 3 have some significant overage or they underperform, underdeliver. And about 1 in 20 are successful. Oxford University found that if the project's over $1 million, the odds of it going so badly, it threatens the very existence of the business, are 1 in 6. So think about that. That's like playing Russian roulette with the life of your company.
Yeah.
Not good. So step number 1, you have to appreciate the magnitude of this issue. Part of my research that really stunned me, 75% of all those failures really boil down to one thing. We never get the business requirements right. The business never fully communicates to the tech team what it is that they need to do. That communication doesn't happen. So 3 out of 4 times. And again, remember what I was just talking about, triaging the problem? Forget the other 25%. Focus on that one thing. You don't get the business requirements right. If we take care of that, we're going to solve more of the problem than anything else. Now, so aside from the frequency of the failures and the cause of the failures, CISQ, which is Consortium for Information and Software Quality out of Carnegie Mellon, has found that they estimate the cost of these failures in the US about $2 trillion a year. $2 trillion. This is real money.
Yeah.
This is real money. This is a real issue. Okay, so first, appreciate the magnitude of the issue. Second, you've got to realize that the reason that this stuff is happening is because our brain doesn't work the way we thought it worked. We've only learned in about the last 20 years that we are not masters of our mental domain. So we used to think, going back 5,000 years, that humans controlled what they said, what they did, what they remembered. We don't. Our brain is a ghost in the machine that does all kinds of things behind our back, metaphorically, that
Yeah,
we never knew about.
subconscious.
And we don't have time to unpack all of them, but there's a couple of really interesting takeaways. The very first thing that we do on IT projects is we always want to talk to the SME, the subject matter expert. There's a problem with expertise that we've only discovered, again, in about the last 15 years. The more of an expert that you are, the more information is transferred from the conscious mind to the unconscious mind. Our brain actually rewires itself over the course of our lives. And the more time that you spend doing something like learning to play an instrument or learning to play a foreign language or mastering a process, that's a very resource intensive exercise. So when you're learning something for the first time, the processing of that happens right up here in the prefrontal cortex. That sucks up a lot of power, a lot of processing, a lot of storage. Your operating system, the ghost in your machine, realizes it's happening and figures out that if it transfers that processing down to the lowest levels of your brain, what we jokingly refer to as the lizard brain, in two structures called the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, it lays down dedicated neural circuits that will do what you used to think about, except it will do it lights out. So it's a reason a great golfer or a tennis player or a guitar player or pianist, the best way to screw them up is to ask them, how did you do that? Because they don't know anymore. The processing's been transferred down below to an unconscious level. Now that's got benefits, but it's got one huge drawback. The benefit is an expert can do something 3,000 times faster than a layman can. And you can do it without thinking about it. The downside is that after that processing has been moved from the top of your brain to the bottom of it, that operating system of ours goes back and flushes our RAM cache. It deletes all the stuff you used to know. So there's a paradox of expertise. The
Yeah,
more you
definitely.
know, the more of an expert you are, the more detail, the more information you internalize, and the more detail you forget. So going back to the subject matter experts, the very people that we've been turning to are the people that are least physically capable of telling us what we need to know. How's that
And
for an eye?
yeah, it's very true. I feel like I've asked some really intelligent people questions, and then they're very subject matter experts, but because they're so good at doing it, it's just very hard to articulate exactly how they did it. So it's just, yeah, like, why are you so good at swimming? Like, how did you do it? They're just like, I just go swimming every day, but they can't tell me like exactly what they did to become such a good swimmer, which just makes it so hard.
I was watching a YouTube clip of Keith Richards on Jimmy Fallon's show. And I guess this was a couple of years ago. And there was just an acoustic guitar. And Keith Richards was getting sound out of this guitar, the likes of which I've never heard. I've played guitar for 50 years. And Jimmy Fallon was blown away. And at the end of it, he looked over at Rich. He goes, how did you get that sound out of that guitar? And Keith Richards looks at me and goes, I have no idea. Yes. So we've failed to appreciate this, right? We think that the expert can just tell us everything we need. They can't. So item number 2 in the communication is you got to realize that your brain is working against you. When you're on an IT project, evolution is your enemy. Quite literally. It's from an evolutionary perspective, we have been hardwired to sabotage every detailed communication we ever had. And we always used to think it's because people screwed up, or they were incompetent, or they were lazy. They're not. They're human. So we've got to change the way we engage. So the third part of it is we've got to understand that the only way to get that subject matter expert to reveal what they know is to hit them with a lot of questions that make them change their orientation, questions that make them get past the summary story that they keep in their conscious mind and go down to their unconscious mind and start digging, start moving around in their mental model. We don't have time to go into this, but we've learned that all information is stored in mental models, like a hologram in your head. The act of thinking is the act of moving around those mental models. So when you can prompt an expert and make them move, you make them think. That thinking generates awareness, and that awareness ultimately leads to the answers that you need. But the biggest problem that we have, this non-communication, is that in our technology-enabled business projects, is that the business people forget to tell the tech team everything they need to know. The tech team never knows which questions they need to ask. So they don't ask it. And we all make these assumptions and nobody ever bothers to confirm. So that's another long answer, but those are the three things. Number one, appreciate the magnitude of the problem. Number two, appreciate the fact that people aren't stupid or lazy or incompetent or malicious. They're human. Their brain doesn't work the way that you thought their brain worked. Number three, you realize you need to dial up your game as a business analyst or a project manager or anybody on the tech team. You need to educate yourself to ask the right questions. You need to understand enough about how a business works to be able to get in there and say, okay, what is it exactly that you're doing? So you can think about, everybody thinks about business execution as being linear. Like I said, moving a ball from point A to point B. But that's only a fourth of the story.
Yeah.
Business execution isn't linear, it's a cycle. Remember I talked about there being 4 types of workers? Those 4 types of workers are the 4 quarters of the cycle. Workers do the work. Managers manage, analysts assess, and executives refine. Within each of those 4 quarters, you can think about there is a business execution life cycle. For the worker, it's what are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it? The second general question you need to ask them is, what are the intercepts along the way? Break it down for me, right? So you go from here to here to here to here, and before you finally get to your end game. The third piece that you need to ask them is, what does success look like? What are the criteria for being able to move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4? Because those are the data points that you need to collect, right? That first wave, you're mapping the workflow of your process. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So like more clarification on the workflow, right? And making sure you're asking a lot of questions. And honestly, when you were speaking, I was like, hey, you are a subject matter expert, right? But the fact that I'm asking you a lot of questions, it makes you really think and then give me like really useful solutions as well.
I've been studying this too now for about the last 5 years, because the thing that was driving me crazy is I couldn't understand how such smart people were consistently making such stupid mistakes. The guy that I mentioned, the CEO of the mortgage company, he's a very bright guy. This is a very accomplished business person, but he'd obviously not thought of these things before, or something was going wrong that he was missing this stuff. He was at such a high level that he couldn't go deep and nobody was asking the right question. So I would say those are the 3 steps.
Definitely. So, drawing from your experience, what does it take from an IT standpoint to bring a startup to IPO? What key lessons did you learn from your own IPO journey?
First, understand the process,
Mm.
understand the business process. Because if you can't track that, if you can't articulate that, you can't automate it. I think the second thing is understanding from a reporting perspective, and a lot of people miss this. Your reporting strategy is your management communication strategy. So if you want to align the operations of your business and the way that your organization works, you need to focus your reporting on what it is that you deem most important, right? So an analyst's job is to really come up with 3 things to figure out what's most important with this business process or with this business, what's most critical to our success. The second thing they need to be able to understand is, what questions do I need to ask and answer about that process to know how well we're performing? So what are the things like, is it speed? Is it output quality? What are the things, is it cost? What are the things that are most critical for me to understand about, or for us to understand about how well we're performing? And then the third thing that an analyst needs to do is be able to assess or be able to figure out, what data do I need to answer those questions? So in terms of preparing an IT shop, understand the process, understand what's most important, understand what questions you need to answer, understand what data you need to do it, and then talk to the executives to figure out, okay, for each of these things, say you have 100 salespeople, and just pick on that as an illustration. 30 of them are hitting quota, 70 of them are not. The 30 that are hitting quota, you're really not that worried about. The 70 that are not, you are. You want to stratify those 70 that are not by the ones that are missing quota the most. Again, you want to go after the people that are underperforming the most and causing the greatest impact, right? An IT department that's really on top of their game, that's really proactive, leads with a CIO that understands the business and is able to go to the executive team and ask them those questions. Break it down. Because a CIO that's able to lead with organizational triage and explain this idea that, okay, we're going to focus on what's okay, what's not okay, what's involved in each group and how much it costs, because I want to give you actionable intelligence that you can act on immediately to get the greatest bang for your buck. You cannot be everywhere as an executive. So you need
Yeah.
to be the places where you have to be to make the biggest difference the fastest. An IT department that thinks like that and stops thinking about, my metric is keeping the lights on. Oh my God, if you're still focused on keeping the lights on, you ought to be shot. Emphasis, dramatic emphasis for effect. We've got to think beyond that. It's like saying, when
Yeah.
you turn on the faucet, water comes out, or we flip the light switch and the lights come on. That's a given, right? You've got to move beyond that. You've got to think strategically. How do you use technology as a weapon in your business as a competitive edge? If you're trying to go public, if you want to do an IPO, focus on those things. Bring your technology to the table in such a way that serves those purposes. And if you can do that, you're really a value add for the business. You're not just a necessary evil.
Yeah, definitely. So like going that extra mile and not just like to just keep the lights on, it's not good enough. You have to like always do a lot more and make sure
Right.
you're actually bringing added value to the business.
I think one of the great frustrations is that we don't train anybody on this stuff. We
Mhm.
barely train business analysts to do this. We certainly don't train the technical staff to think this way. Yeah, they tend to get very focused on the bits and bytes and on the hardware. They tend not to think about how that is used to accelerate the performance of the organization. And that's probably one of the things. That's probably the single biggest thing that I've focused on throughout my career.
Definitely. I think this seems like a problem that's like quite prominent within bigger companies, right? Because in smaller companies, communication would be like smaller startups would be easier between like technical and business people. But I think the more you scale, the more like disintegrated things get. Yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah, the harder it gets.
So you were recruited by the state of California as the chief strategist for IT project planning. Can you share some insights into what that role entailed and the impact you had?
That sounds a little bit more grandiose than it actually is in practice, but the state has been running projects in a very waterfallish style a long time. And they are attempting to change the way that they do that now. And I've been working with that. I
Mm.
candidly still don't know whether or not this effort's going to be successful, because as with anything in politics are involved. And, I'm just not sure how the politics are all going to play at this point. There's a
Yeah.
lot of vested interests that aren't necessarily focused on performance. But in terms of what I've been advocating and steering them towards is it's clearly not waterfall, and it's clearly not agile in the sense that let's just make it up as we go along and see what happens, right? The idea that it's something in the middle. The best sort of hybrid illustration that I've ever seen of this was from Chubb Insurance, where they adopted Agile about a decade or so ago. And within short order, they had to shut it all down. It was a complete disaster because they were just making it up as they went along. And they realized, wow, that doesn't work. So they broke it down into a couple phases. So the first thing that they did is say, we're going to break all of our projects down into programs. So you have a program with multiple smaller projects underneath it. And they categorized their projects in 5 buckets. They said it's either 0 to 250, 250 to 500,000, 500,000 to $1 million to 2.5, or 2.5 to 5. They will not do a project greater than 5 million. If it's great, and this is what works for them. But anything over 5 million, they won't touch. So the very first thing that they do is they pull together the entire team and they basically do a business analysis. So they get the sponsor, they get the project manager, they get a business analyst, they get a tech lead, and then they get the subject matter expert. And they figure out what's the business case for this. And if it's $100,000 project, they can do that in a couple of hours. If it's a $5 million project, it may take them a year to do it. Not of elapsed time, not of dedicated effort, right? But they call out that their SaaS phase. Once they figured out that there's a business case for doing this, which you should always do regardless, and part of what I'm attempting to suggest that the state of California do, is, figure out the business case first. The second thing is, once you know that there is a business case, then plan it. And have you ever read the work of Ben Flybridge?
No.
So he's one of the leading experts in the world on large projects, and he's a professor at Oxford University. He was the guy that came up with the research with McKinsey that I quoted earlier about 1 in 6 projects going so badly that they threaten the existence of the business. Flybridge talks about the fact that, in fact, he just published a book called How Big Things Get Done that came out about last April. It is an excellent read. So I would strongly recommend that anybody who's interested in this topic get that book. He makes a very clear distinction between planning for the management of a project and planning for the solution. What we don't do is we don't plan the solution. Real planning is prototyping. So it's using process maps and storyboards to mock up what your solution needs to look like before you ever try and build it. So this is what Chubb Insurance did. They created process maps and storyboards. They would spend time planning, and they would refer to that as their sprint zero, but sprint zero for them could also be a year. It wasn't time bound to a couple of weeks. So they would know what they were going to do before you try to do it. And there's a really key point to this. The reason that's so critical is that everybody's mind's eye is different. Actually, there's 2 reasons. Number one, we can't keep that much in our working memory at any given time. We're limited to about 5 to 7 things, if we're lucky, right? If nothing else is going on. We can't think about that much to begin with, and we all visualize it differently. When you create a process map or a storyboard, that is the bridge between business and IT. That mental image or that physical image is the only thing that everybody can see and understand. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I put a process map or storyboard up on the screen and they go, "Oh my, that's what you meant? Oh, I was thinking about it like this. Oh God, no, I thought about it. This happens all the time." So it's only when you reconcile all that stuff with, here's an image. This is what I think it ought to look like. And this isn't rocket science. You can do this on Excel and a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't create elaborate modeling software to be able to do this, or graphics software. It doesn't even require UX designer. Just get the idea across. And what people don't think about is when you created a picture of it with a description of how it worked, you've defined your requirements, right?
Yeah.
You've laid out your requirements of what you need to do. So again, How Big Things Get Done is a wonderful book in that regard. There was another book that came out recently by Jennifer Plaka, who was the former deputy, I think, technology office CTO for the United States. And her book was called Recoding America. She also talks about the urgency of this and how you need to get these artifacts in place because those prototypes are the bridge between the business people and the technical staff. That planning, prototyping is step 2. Step 3 is you build it, and you build it as fast as you possibly can. Flybridge talks about, he has this wonderful illustration. He says, think slowly, but act fast. And what he means is take your time to think through the prototype, and it may take you months. That is real work. It's not like you're not doing something. That's real work in the planning. So when you actually start to develop, he said, it's like opening the door of a house. The longer the door is open, the more flies are going to come in. He said, unexpected stuff is going to happen. He said, so you want to close that door as fast as you possibly can. So execute quickly, build the thing as fast as you can, and then step back and do a retrospective. What did we miss? What else do we need to do? You start with the MVP and then you build out from there. So that assess, plan, build, refine model is what I'm advocating. And we'll see whether or not it flies. One of the biggest challenges we face is that the budgeting process for most states is all waterfall based. And California was established as a state in 1850. And our budgetary process hasn't changed since 1850. So we're going to have to change the way we fund these deals. And that's one of the hurdles that I don't know how it's going to turn out.
But it's definitely very good to try and move from waterfall to agile models because, yeah, I don't agree with the waterfall model at all.
Oh,
And yeah,
nor do I.
definitely.
But
Yeah,
it's funny how many times I've had conversations with really devout Agile enthusiasts that basically say, just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. No, that doesn't work, right? Nice
yeah,
try. That's going to lead to disaster.
absolutely.
So it's somewhere in between. You need to
Yeah,
plan in iterations, plan in phases. That's what I'm saying. Start with an MVP, just the bare bones skeleton, and then add out from there. Yeah, there's a joke with Waterfall, especially in this day and age. Can you imagine really believing that you're going to be able to envision your requirements 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road? Really? I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
yeah,
How am I going to
exactly.
possibly know what's going to happen 1, 5, 10 years downstream? What I'm going to need? I can't imagine what Apple's cooking up right now that's going to completely change the way we interact from a technology perspective. Why would I try and build for something for a future that I can't possibly understand? But in the same way, and a lot of the signers of the Agile Manifesto have come out and said this, Agile was never meant as something where you just made it up as you went along. You had to know what you were going to build before you try and build it, but you just need to build it iteratively.
Definitely. So, on a more personal note, what hurdles have you faced in your personal life that have shaped who you are today? And how did you navigate the low points?
That's quite a question. I started off very early on, very hell-bent on making as much money as I could possibly make. And that's just a very candid reflection. When you've gotten to the point where you've watched a lot of friends die or a lot of people around you die, you realize that life is short and it's precious. And you need to spend as much time with the people that you care about as you possibly can. The end of your life, the only thing that matters are the number of people you loved and the number of people you were loved by. Everything else is inconsequential, right? So for me, it was a big refocusing on what was most valuable, what was most important. I've now buried 11 colleagues who never made it to 60, all in the tech sector. And 4 of the people were people that came in fairly early on in my software company, the second deal I did. One of which was a co-founder, these are four all died of deep vein thromboses, which came from, it's a blood clot that originated very long hours sitting in the same position or on airplanes. So when you're in the tech space, it's pretty common for people to pull all-nighters or to work really long hours, step glued in front of their console, just coding, right? We need a much more balanced approach, because when you've seen that many people die that young, you realize that just sitting in one place for years on end isn't particularly good for you. There's the joke now that sitting is the new smoking. So I think for me, it was just a reorientation of what's truly important in life, what gives you the most joy. And also the realization that a certain amount of money is nice. It gives you some freedom and flexibility, but you really don't need that much to be content. And I think the other realization is something that I've come to in about the last 5 or 6 years. I'm at the stage of my life where I just want to get back. What I'm doing now, and what all of us are doing in Bridging Business IT, is really focused on coaching and teaching. I have been contracted by ADP to put together a course for their PMO on how to use business requirements, how you address a lot of the things we've been talking about today. And I have been slowly converting that over to a digital course that is not yet ready and is requiring more effort than I ever dreamed it was going to. But I want to memorialize the things that I've learned and that we've all learned so that we can pass it on and share it. Because that's ultimately what gives me the greatest joy and the greatest meaning in life. It's about building relationships with people, right? And when you can have conversations with folks where you help them see something that they didn't see before and open a door that they didn't know was there, that's what's fun. That's what's most entertaining for me. So in a personal journey, I think that's probably, that's the bulk of it. Okay. Money's nice, but that's not what I'm doing. That's not why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Would you say that you had to get to a certain point in terms of financially for you to be able to give back as well? So it's like you make sure you're taken care of, and then now you can take care of others.
I wouldn't say it was a requirement. It just happens to be the way that it worked out for me. I think if I were a little bit more emotionally mature at a younger age, I would have realized that the two could have coexisted. Yeah, I think that was a deficiency in me, that thinking that I have to make money first and then I can go off and do something else, embark in a more noble trajectory. But I think I could have been doing both all the way along. It was just, like I said, it was my own shortcomings that kept me focused on where I was. Yeah, it's just, in 2000, I bought a yacht thinking, and I had put myself through school. So my father had abandoned the family when I had just turned 17. He took off. I put myself through school. I worked 40 hours a week as doing construction while getting 2 degrees from the University of California in 4 years. And for all intents and purposes, was a functioning alcoholic, a high functioning alcoholic as an undergraduate. And the point of that story is I had worked so hard for so long and had worked my tail off at Price Waterhouse and in the first 2 business ventures. And I finally got to the point where I had some cash. And I'm thinking, I've always wanted a boat. This is going to be great, right? And then lo and behold, you get this thing that you've wanted for 25 years where you've been killing yourself for all this time. And then you're like, wow, this doesn't make me happy. Money doesn't make me happy. And about a year after that, I did a 100-mile backpacking trip with my son in the Southern Rockies. And we were out for a couple of weeks. And I was out there, I had a sleeping bag, a tent, and a backpack. And I'd never been happier in my life. And I realized, oh my God, money doesn't make me happy. Being around the people that I love does. Being free does. That was a huge epiphany. That was a big change for me, and a real big pivot point in terms of deciding what was I going to do next and how was I going to do it.
Definitely. I think yeah.
Go ahead.
I think this is a very good note to close out the podcast on. That, yeah, while money doesn't make you happy, but helping people does. So I feel like what you're doing now is like coaching businesses, all these things. Like, it helps the people who actually really need the money. Because like it doesn't make you happy, but it helps you like you need it to a certain extent and then you don't need it, I feel. So thank you so much today for sharing all of your expertise on the podcast. And yeah, and take care.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.